Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your weekly deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Rick Spair, and joining me as always is Laura.
Happy Sunday, Rick. We've got a really meaty story today, and it's one I think people across pharma and healthcare have been waiting to see for a long time, honestly.
That's right. We're spending the whole episode on the Novo Nordisk and OpenAI partnership, which on the surface sounds like another corporate AI announcement, but actually has some real operational teeth to it.
It really does. Just to set the table for everyone, this was announced on April 14th of 2026, and it is a strategic partnership running from drug discovery all the way through commercial operations.
And the players matter here. Novo Nordisk is the Danish pharma giant behind Ozempic and Wegovy, two of the most talked about drugs in the world right now. And OpenAI obviously needs no introduction.
Exactly. So when those two companies sign a deal that's described as enterprise-wide, with pilots this year and full integration by the end of 2026, that's not the usual innovation theater we tend to see.
Let's start at the beginning then. What is the actual scope of this partnership? Because when I read the press release, it sounded like every department at Novo Nordisk got included in the deal.
That's basically right. The agreement covers research and development, clinical trial planning, regulatory documentation, manufacturing operations, supply chain logistics, and the commercial side that handles sales and customer engagement. It is genuinely end-to-end.
That is an enormous surface area. Most pharma AI deployments I have seen historically have been narrow. One model for protein folding, another for trial site selection. This is something architecturally different from that pattern.
Right, and that breadth is what makes it interesting strategically. Pharma has been famous for piloting AI in 12 different silos and never connecting them. So going horizontal across the company is a real architectural choice here.
Let's talk about the drug discovery piece first, because that's the part the market's reacted to most strongly. What is the model actually going to be doing inside the lab on a day-to-day basis?
The framing in the announcement was about scalable model-driven analytics that surface non-obvious targets and mechanistic signals across complex omics and clinical datasets. In plain English, finding patterns humans miss in genomic and trial data.
I want to push on that a bit because that exact promise has been made before. Every couple of years, foundation model partnership claims it will surface hidden drug targets, and the results are mixed at best.
That's a fair pushback. And I think the honest answer is that we don't know yet whether OpenAI's frontier models can outperform purpose-built biomodels like AlphaFold or RoseTyfold on this particular kind of task.
So why do this then? If you are Novo Nordisk and you have access to specialized scientific models, why bet on a generalist foundation model partner instead of building or buying a vertical AI lab outright?
I think the honest answer is leverage and pace. Building a state-of-the-art biomodel takes years and a small army of researchers, while OpenAI gives you a frontier model with rapid iteration baked right in.
That makes sense, but it also creates a dependency. If your discovery pipeline runs on someone else's model, your roadmap is partially controlled by their roadmap, which is a real strategic question for any pharma board.
Absolutely, and Novo's leadership has clearly decided that the speed of iteration is worth that dependency, at least for now. They are betting that being fast matters more than being fully self-reliant on the AI stack.
Let's move to clinical trials because that is where I think the real cost savings could live. Trials are notoriously expensive and slow, and any meaningful compression there shows up directly in the bottom line.
This is honestly the part of the deal I'm most excited about. The announcement specifically calls out streamlining clinical trial planning and regulatory documentation, both of which are document-heavy and judgment-heavy at the same time.
Walk me through what that looks like in practice. If I'm a clinical operations lead at Novo, what does my Tuesday morning actually look like with this AI system fully deployed in my workflow?
You'd probably start the day reviewing AI-generated draft protocols for a phase 2 obesity study, which would already incorporate inclusion criteria, statistical power calculations, and site recommendations that historically took weeks of cross-functional meetings to produce.
That is a meaningful change. I have talked to people who have spent 6 months just on trial design, so collapsing that into a few weeks of human review on a draft is genuinely a big deal.
It is, and then the same logic applies to regulatory documentation. The package you submit to the FDA or the EMA is enormous. and a lot of it is structured boilerplate that an LLM can draft and a human can verify.
Now, the obvious question every regulator is going to ask: are the FDA and the European Medicines Agency actually going to accept AI-generated trial documentation? That feels like a wide open governance question right now.
That is the right question, and I would say the answer is partial acceptance with a lot of caveats. Both agencies have signaled that AI-assisted drafting is fine, but full AI-authored regulatory packages are still being negotiated.
Which brings up a point I want to underscore. Novo Nordisk is not deploying this in a vacuum. They are going to navigate at least a dozen different regulatory regimes simultaneously while moving from pilot to production this year.
Exactly, and that is why the announcement specifically emphasizes data governance and human-in-the-loop oversight. They are clearly aware that clinical, regulatory, and ethical risk is the gating factor on how fast this whole thing scales.
Let's pivot to manufacturing because I think that piece has been under-discussed in the coverage. Novo Nordisk has had real supply problems with Wegovy, and AI in manufacturing is much more proven than AI in discovery.
Yeah, this is the unsexy but probably most immediately impactful part of the deal. AI in process optimization, predictive maintenance, batch quality forecasting, and supply chain orchestration is genuinely mature technology at this point in the industry.
Right. This is where you can point to other industries like semiconductors, automotive, even consumer packaged goods, and say, here's what AI has done for yield, downtime, and inventory turns. Pharma has been late to that party.
And there is a specific reason pharma has been late. The regulatory burden on changing a validated manufacturing process is significant. So even where AI could help, you have had to balance benefit against revalidation cost in a way other industries do not.
That is a great point. So in some sense, the OpenAI partnership is also a signal that Novo Nordisk thinks the regulatory environment around AI and manufacturing is maturing fast enough that the revalidation cost is now worth paying.
Yes, and combined with the GLP-1 demand surge, the math just works differently than it did 3 years ago. When you cannot make enough Wegovy to meet demand, every percentage point of yield improvement becomes enormous revenue.
Let's talk workforce, because this is the part I always watch most closely. What is Novo actually saying about its people? And how does that differ from the boilerplate every AI partnership puts in their press release?
The interesting wording in this one is that workforce transformation is treated as a core deliverable, with structured upskilling intended to operationalize AI tools rather than layering technology onto existing processes. That is more committal than usual.
I want to be a bit skeptical there, though. We just covered Snap a few episodes ago, where the company said almost the same thing right before announcing 1,000 layoffs and $500 million in cost cuts.
That skepticism is warranted, and I think the honest answer is that we won't know for at least a year whether Novo's upskilling commitment is real or rhetorical. Almost every AI deployment so far has had some workforce displacement.
My own read is that pharma is structurally a bit different here. The bottleneck in pharma is not headcount in the back office. It is scientific and clinical talent, and that talent is genuinely hard to replace with current models.
I think that is right for now, but the back office part of pharma is large and AI exposed in the same way as other big enterprises. Finance, legal, regulatory operations, and commercial are the roles where pressure will appear first.
Let's zoom out for a second. Why is this deal happening right now? And why with OpenAI specifically rather than, say, Anthropic or Google or one of the specialized bio AI labs that already exist?
My read on the timing is the GLP-1 race. Eli Lilly has been catching up fast on Mounjaro and Zepbound, and Novo Nordisk needs every speed advantage it can find on the next generation of obesity and diabetes drugs.
That competitive pressure makes a lot of sense. Novo's moat used to be its drug pipeline and manufacturing scale, but Lilly has closed a lot of that gap, so the next moat has to come from somewhere else entirely.
Exactly. An AI infrastructure is one of the few places where you can theoretically get a compounding advantage. If you genuinely shave a year off your time to candidate, that compounds across every program in your portfolio for years.
As for why OpenAI specifically, I'd guess it comes down to platform breadth. OpenAI has a coding model, a reasoning model, a multimodal model. and an agentic stack, and you can integrate one vendor across all those use cases.
That's right, and the consolidation argument matters more than people realize. If you can sign one master agreement and one data governance framework for every AI deployment in the company, that is a massive procurement and security simplification.
Let me play devil's advocate on one more angle. What is the risk that this turns into a lock-in problem 2 or 3 years from now when Novo has built half its operational infrastructure on a single model provider?
That is a real concern, and I think the way Novo Nordisk is mitigating it is by keeping the data layer and governance in-house while only renting the model layer. That is the standard playbook for avoiding deep platform dependency.
That is a sensible architecture. Keep your data, your evaluation pipelines, and your guardrails internal, and then treat the foundation model itself as a swappable component when something measurably better comes along in the market.
And realistically, given how fast frontier models are turning over right now, a 2-year contract is probably the longest anyone wants to sign anyway. The cost of switching foundation models is dropping every single quarter at this point.
Okay, let's bring this home. What should listeners actually take away from this story, and what should they be watching for over the next 6 to 12 months as the partnership rolls out into production environments?
First, watch the pilot announcements. Novo said pilots across R&D, manufacturing, and commercial in 2026. So concrete pilot disclosures with measurable outcomes will tell us whether this is real progress or just press release theater.
Second, watch the regulatory footprint carefully. If Novo manages to file an AI-assisted regulatory submission and have it accepted by either the FDA or the EMA without major friction, that becomes the playbook for the entire industry.
Third, watch the competitor response from across the street. Eli Lilly cannot afford to let Novo build a structural AI advantage, so expect to see either a competing OpenAI deal, a partnership with Anthropic or Google, or an internal lab announcement.
And the fourth thing I would watch is the workforce data over time. If Novo's employee count is roughly stable a year from now, that upskilling commitment was real. If it shrinks materially, the rhetoric was cover for something else.
Exactly. And honestly, this story is going to be a bellwether for how all of regulated industry, not just pharma, integrates frontier AI at scale. Banking, insurance, and energy will all be reading the same playbook over the next year.
Big picture, my own take is cautiously optimistic. The combination of urgent commercial pressure and a serious governance framework is the right ingredient list for an AI deployment that actually delivers something beyond a flashy press release announcement.
I agree with that, and I would add one note of caution. The announcement is great, but pharma has a long history of partnership announcements that quietly fade away. The real test is the boring operational metrics 6 quarters from now.
Well said, Laura. We will definitely be tracking those operational metrics on this show as they come out, and we will revisit this story whenever Novo or OpenAI publishes concrete progress against the partnership goals over the coming year.
Looking forward to it. And if any listeners are working in pharma operations or clinical development and want to share what you are seeing on the ground, please reach out because I would genuinely love to hear from the inside.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.